Hi there, welcome to our family's morning basket time. I am doing a voiceover because it's really important to me that my boys and my girls, but my boys, especially at these ages, don't ever feel like they're performing for a camera when we're doing our schoolwork. So you'll see them look at the camera a good bit just because I don't bring a camera into our school time ever, and you will see the one kid that always has to make like the funny faces, and he's just a ham. So I just wanted to give that caveat up front that I told them not to look at the camera and make faces, but like the temptation was just too strong. Okay, so what we're starting out doing here is our menu from Morning Virtues. And I grabbed my phone because we are going to be listening to the hymn. So the first thing we did together was recite the affirmation, and that is in the meaningful menu portion of Morning Virtues or Morning Classics. Now, if you are not utilizing Morning Virtues and Morning Classics, you might want to skip through this first portion because that is what we're doing here. We recited the affirmation, so I said a portion and then they repeated it after me. And now we're listening to the hymn, and we've just begun the self-control issue, so the boys don't know this hymn yet. I really don't even know this hymn, so I turn it on my phone, the version that we prefer, and then we just sing it together. It's just that simple. So I'm going to be kind of skipping through portions of this and just narrating to you what we're doing just to clarify, but we're not going to go real time through all of it because it's about an hour worth of school time. You'll also know that there is, notice that there is a fair bit of fidgeting that's happening around me. That's what I expect to be completely normal for boys at this age, and I let them bring anything into this time that they want to play with and fidget with their hands. Just to kind of give them a little bit of help. Now, if I'm not feeling like being wiggled at, sometimes I'll sit in a chair that's kind of off the camera to the left and then have them sit on the floor or on the couch so that all the wiggling and the bouncing around isn't driving me bonkers. So here we are continuing with our menu. So we went through a poem, and now we are working on our artist study. So what I'm doing right here, you see the art print. I was reading from the back of the art print, reminding the boys of the title of the work, as well as the name of the artist, and we're just kind of looking at it right now, noticing things about light. We're discussing foreground, middle ground, and background because that's what the summary on the back of the art print talked about. So I've asked the boys to describe just things that they notice about it. Is this, for this exact topic with foreground, I was asking them the difference between what's in the background of the picture and what's in the foreground of the picture, and how those may look darker or lighter, clearer or less clear, those types of things. And for the most part, the text on the back of the print is going to equip you to discuss those types of things or something else about the art piece and the artist. So you don't have to know anything about the artist or art at all in order to implement the artist study. And that is the goal of Morning Virtues, is for families that want to implement artist study, that they would feel equipped to do that without being overwhelmed or confused about what to say to their children. So now we are going to be reading the ology. So I'm looking at the memory statement board to see what lesson we're supposed to be on, because if you look at your memory statement card for your catechism, it will tell you at the bottom which of the lessons from theology coordinate. So I wanted to make sure I was in the right place in the book. So what I typically do is I will flip back to whatever the last lesson is that we read and just ask them some questions or remind them of what we did read about so that we don't completely lose the last piece of information that we had before. And then I will ask them some, like here I'm asking them questions and getting a little bit of answer from them, listening to what they have to say, that kind of thing. So just discussing what it was that we read the last time and letting them answer that. And then in just a moment, we will recite the new week's catechism, and then we will sit here and read from theology the context for that catechism and answer any questions they have, or maybe even ask them a couple of questions from what I read. And now I'm doing like 5x speed because we don't want to sit here and just stare at me read from theology. But you can see there's lots of wiggles and looking at the picture and fidgeting and all those types of things. And I try to make sure that I am asking them to be attentive. So if the toy does become the focus instead of what I'm saying, then I will put an end to the toy. So here we are finishing up the reading of theology. We're putting that book away, and then we're going to grab Aesop's Fable. So we do have 2 fable books that are scheduled in sequence 1, and we read from those once a week or twice a week, I believe. You'll have to look at your grid. We, this year, actually in our home, because we did most of sequence 1 last year, we're reading Just So stories. So I was doing this just to kind of make it clear, like, this is what we do in sequence 1, and I was having to discuss why we're reading the fables again. They were asking me about that. So anyway, we just sit down, we read through the fables, and I love these illustrated fables because sometimes it's not clear in these fables what the point of them is. So I think the illustrations can really help with their comprehension a lot. And I like to read the fable and then ask them what they think the moral of the fable is. And then we'll compare that to what the book says the moral of the fable is. And sometimes they're the same, but a lot of times they're different. And then we will discuss why we think that the author felt like this was the best story to illustrate the moral that they say that it expresses, and just have a little bit of a conversation about that. So there's the interesting aspect of this anthropomorphic animals making these human decisions, and that's just engaging on one level. The illustrations are engaging, the language in these is really engaging, but then it's a little bit of a primer in logic where we're asking them to make their own kind of share their own perspective about what the fable has to say and what they would gain from that if no one was telling them what to gain from it, and then discussing the worldview or the perspective of the author who has decided this other moral was the point. And so it's just a really good exercise in just teaching to think, not to accept what's being said, but to kind of look at things from other people's perspective and evaluate why they may think or believe what they think or believe. So here we're transitioning into our chapter book read aloud. I love these starter introductions to some of the books. My boys are not great chapter book read aloud listeners. They just don't quite like get as engaged in those as they do picture books. So these are the classic starts are a good bridge for us. And they love anything related to another little boy making decisions that they can evaluate and think about. And so we're reading Pinocchio right now, which is a wonderful book that helps all kids to really develop their moral imagination when it comes to being truthful and accurate, those types of things. So we're going to sit there and talk about the story. I'll go through, if I feel like somebody's not paying attention, I'll stop and I'll ask them to tell me a summary of what I just read. I don't require an oral narration every day, and I try to be as engaging as possible when I'm reading. Like, I use voices and hand motions and all those things, because I have noticed that if my boys are listening to audio plays of a story versus an audio book, or even an audio book where the author's reading it with some different voices, like the Magic Treehouse series, they are a lot more engaged. So I try to be interesting when I'm reading aloud and not be self-conscious about that. Just, they're my kids and they think mommy's silly dork anyway, so it's fun. And it keeps them a lot more engaged to kind of act things out and read. And if there's language in the story that's beyond their vocabulary, by using emphasis in my voice And by using hand gestures and those types of things, it helps them to understand that vocabulary, and it adds to their vocabulary. Sometimes if I run across a word in a read aloud and I know that they're probably not familiar with it, I'll say that word and then I'll say a synonym that I know they're familiar with. So I'm automatically introducing them to the definition of the word just incidentally as we're reading the story, and it helps them to develop their vocabulary that much more quickly. Now we have gotten up off of the couch and transitioned over to our memory statement board. Sometimes if they've had some really significant wiggles and I felt like I lost their attention a lot during the read aloud, we'll have a 15 or 20 minute break between doing our read aloud time, and I'm going to close a window or a shade because the camera keeps getting blinded, so now they get to ham it up just a little bit while my back is turned. Anyway, and so I will give them a little bit of break between times, or even have them do some things like jumping jacks, push-ups, sit-ups. I'll have them go out and do, like, task them, like, go do 5 flips on the trampoline, things like that, because we've really got to get that excess energy out. And honestly, like, their brain works a lot better when they've done some physical activities. So you see Rip is right there in the middle of doing schoolwork as well. So I have some flowers on the rug that each boy has their own flower they're supposed to stand on. I think Rip is sitting on Daxton's flower. But the reason is that we want them to be focused on what we are saying and what we are looking at, and not necessarily dancing around or being super crazy. Again, it's not like I expect them to stand there like rigid army people, but before this, I gave them time to go and exercise and get some wiggles out, and memory statement board time is 10 minutes. It's 10 minutes that I require some focus and physical self-control of their body. So memory statement time is super easy. I start at the top left-hand side of my board and I go down through each of the cards. If it is a card that was up there for the prior week, then I'm going to ask them the question and wait for them to give me an answer. Hopefully, even if they can't give me the exact statement of whatever it was, they would be able to give me some of the terms or the general gist or idea of what it was that we read. And then if it's new, I'll say part of it, they'll repeat after me. I'll say part of it, they'll repeat after me. Again, if I feel like I didn't have their whole attention while we were repeating, like they were kind of emptily repeating it without attending to what they were even saying, then I will go back and I'll be like, okay, what year was that? And where did that happen? And what was the name of the person? And then they'll give me nice empty stares because they were not paying attention. And so we'll have to go back through it again. And by me just kind of giving them those little pop quizzes, it helps to help them focus a little bit more the next time around. And so, if they don't remember something from the previous week, that's okay. We don't have a mentality of like punishing because they didn't lock it in the first time. We're just going to stick with it until they pretty well know it. And by pretty well know it, I want them to know the gist. Now, there's some information that if they're memorizing scripture, I want them to memorize it accurately. And if they're memorizing the capital and the states, then I want them to know the capital and the states. But if they, if it's something like the history statement or the catechism, if they understand and remember the spirit of it, then that's fine with me. So here I have Colton coming over and pointing to the states and telling me the capitals of those states. And then we'll just keep going from there through all the different memory work. And since I'm doing 2 kids on the same program at the same time, I'll also mention this just in case you're in the same situation. One of them will tend to have strength in a subject, and then the other one will have strength in a different subject. And so it can be a struggle to always have the one that wants to answer the questions and the other one doesn't. And you also see, like, I'm just going to throw it in, like, Daxton was hungry. So he went in there and got a sandwich, and I needed to reply to a text message and stuff. So we're very, very kind of relaxed. I didn't want him to actually eat while we were trying to answer things out loud. So I told him to take it back in there and he could get his chicken sandwich in a few minutes. And this is like, boys never fill up. But anyway, so I have them, if I know that Daxton knows the answer, I'm going to ask Colton specifically to give me the answer. And of course, just like all children are likely to do, I'll say, Daxton, don't answer this, let Colton answer it. And as soon as I ask it, Daxton answers it. So like, of course, we deal with those things too. That's just kind of part of parenting and homeschooling at the same time. And so we might have a consequence of like, okay, well, you have to go sit in your room for the next 30 minutes while I just do this stuff with Colton. And so he might act like he doesn't care, like, oh, I don't even have to do school right now. Like, that's better for me. But he'll get really bored being in his room by himself for 30 minutes because he does not like to be alone. So that is like an appropriate consequence for him. So that's just like a little bit of a side note, because we all struggle with behavior issues with our children while we're home educating. And I don't want you to see us doing this on camera and assuming that I'm not experiencing those exact same things. And so we try to give margin for normal behavior, a normal amount of wiggles, a normal amount of movement, an acceptable amount of interruptions as they ask questions that either are related or are not related to what I was just talking about. But then, like, I have my natural boundary to how much of that kind of distraction we're going to deal with. And so I have consequences that are set in place. The boys exactly know what they're going to be every single time if they don't pay attention or they don't stay focused or they interrupt with questions that are not related. Or if I can't even get through a story because they're asking me so many questions. There's inquisitiveness, and then there's like, you're just being a pest because you'd rather hear yourself talk than hear me read this book. So we, have those natural consequences, and everybody's family is different. We'll do timeout in our rooms. We do a lot of physical exercise as a consequence. Like if they're not demonstrating self-control and they're not staying focused, I'm like, oh, you're showing me right now that your mind is a little bit weak and you're not able to take control of your body and your mouth. So let's strengthen ourselves just a little bit. So they'll have to do push-ups and sit-ups and all those types of things. And we really don't have to do that too often because they'd rather not have to do that. But it really does encourage them to not interrupt or be rude or ask an excessive amount of questions or off-topic questions. And it also really does help focus their brain. Like if they're having a hard time with reading lessons, we will be like, okay, well, you need to get up and do 15 jumping jacks. And every time they do that, they come back and they're like, whatever word they were stuck on, they just can read it all of a sudden. And so if that's not something that you're doing, especially with your energetic kiddos, then I just want to throw that as an option. It's not a punishment. I'm not angry at them. I'm not saying like, oh, you can't do this right, so get up and give me 15 jumping jacks right now. Like there's no crossness to it at all. It's like, oh, your brain is really struggling. Let's jump out the cobwebs. Give me 15 jumping jacks real quick. And my husband actually brought that into our school time once he started homeschooling with the boys, and it has helped tremendously. So I just wanted to pass that tidbit along. But anyway, we're like 10 minutes into memory statements. We're getting pretty close to the end. Obviously, we're really enthusiastic when they're paying attention, when they are focused, when they are answering correctly, when they can tell me information back, when they're getting it right. We're going to do high fives and all those types of things because I want them to care. I want them to get enjoyment out of having accurate information and genuinely helpful and good knowledge. Okay, so now we have transitioned to location number 3 that you probably recognize from the organization video. This is our dining room table, and it has the convenient little drawers. So, bless you, Colton Wyatt. We always have the sneezes around here. We have the boys right now are working on the daily pages in their student notebook. So they have their dry erase marker, and they're working on their name and their emotional assessment. And then in a moment, we're going to work on their count. counting their coins. So right now they're doing that, and I'm over kind of pulling things out so that we can use it, and then I'll just tuck it back whenever we get done. But for the coin cup, we use, I think on this day we had fake coins, but I typically have a bag of real coins. And sometimes I'll even reward them, like, if you can count this accurately, you can have it when I have the real coins. So that's just a little side note. Colton always draws in some emotion that I have not put in on the daily page. So he always feels some sort of way that's not in there that he needs to add. So I give the boy their coins. I just give them random amounts. Daxton is really good with coins, so I let him sit over there and just kind of handle that himself. With Colton, we're still reviewing the names. He knows the value when he sees them, but he struggles with the names. So we review that every day, and then I let him count those and then add that amount into his notebook. You can see in the background there that Daxton's already done. Like I said, coins are not an issue for him. We still do it every day because it just doesn't hurt, and he needs to be doing something while Colton's doing his. So one thing that Daxton's working on is counting the coins inside of his head instead of literally counting out loud, because obviously they're both sitting there at the table trying to count separately, so that can be really challenging to listen to someone else count. So that's more what he's working on, is being able to do it in his head and then make sure that he writes it on the line appropriately when he has like a dollar and some change versus just the change amount. So here we're kind of finishing up with Colton, making sure, like, remembering to count the biggest coins first and then move to the next. So this may not be anything that you need to do with your students, but it's in there because it's a part of many first grade and second grade math programs to have this consistent review. So we have just incorporated it in there to make it convenient for us and also pretty. So I've wiped that page off before we turn to the next page, because that's just really important with these pre-laminated sheets that they be clean. I've had a couple of marks kind of stick around because we didn't wipe them right away. So now, again, Daxton really knows his days of the week and his months of the year. That's something he has complete fluency in. So we're doing this page more for his brother than for him. Now, the line that is on the bottom of the page that has the month and day and year, that is something they're both working on. So we're going to sing our days of the week. Then we're going to, blob in the one that's current, and then check the one that's the next day, tomorrow, and then also discuss the months of the year, and then do that date at the bottom of the page. Once that page is complete, I pull out the tens, rods, and the ones unit little squares, cubes, and set just a random amount of those out into the middle of the table. And now it is time to find our day of the month, and then have them write in and use the 10 rods and the ones units to complete their little houses. So this is a very easy way to review place value. We've been doing this since the preschool morning binder, so this is not something that they have a hard time with, but every once in a while somebody will have a glitch. So you'll see, once I've told them to do it, they immediately, Daxton instantly knows exactly what to do. Colton does as well. But sometimes, even though they know what to do, they might forget that this is called the tens place and the ones place. And so we'll discuss that for a second if we need to. So now it's time for the weather observation page. You'll see everybody's abandoning the table, and that is because they each go to look out the window and do their weather observation, and they don't trust one another, so they both have to go see it for themselves. And then sometimes I feel like their evaluation is not really fair. I feel like this is one of those days where there were a few clouds in the sky, but it was not a total gray out like Colton circled. So we just discussed the difference between what it would look like for there to be like the whole sky filled with clouds with the tiniest amount of sun versus like seeing some clouds but still seeing some blue sky. So this is important for accuracy. We don't want our children to exaggerate things or tell us things that are not fully true. And so something as simple as weather observation can help us to help them to remember that telling the whole accurate truth to the best of our ability is always the right thing to do. And then we usually ask Google what the temperature is outside, and then the boys will fill out their thermometer. And then usually I'll just look over at the clock, and whatever time it is on our digital clock, I'll change it just a little bit and then have them put that on the analog clock and the digital clock. So that is this daily page. Up next, it is time for our spelling words. And as we've mentioned before, the spelling words reinforce the spelling rule. Another thing that we consistently have to practice here is just sounding out the words inside of our own mind and not saying them out loud so that your brother hears you sounding the word out. Not only is it a distraction, but you're also like providing him with answers if he didn't know it. So that's something they definitely struggle with. So I don't know where I'm at right now, but I guess I was standing up doing their spelling words. I know where I was. I went to go get the baby. So baby and lat, we're just going to go through and continue the spelling list one by one. And on their spelling, when they were younger, like in kindergarten, when we would do some spelling words, I did not correct their handwriting. So if they wrote a letter backwards, or it was floating in the air, or they used capital letters where they weren't supposed to, I did not worry about that. However, now that we're in first, and especially Daxton in second, if they write a letter backwards or some other kind of crazy way and it's just not the right way to write it, I do go ahead and have them, after they've completely spelled the word, I'll kind of draw their attention to it. Like, okay, you've spelled the word correctly, but does anything about this word look funny to you? And if they can't pick it out, I'll say, well, let's look at this S. Does that look like an S, or does it look funny in some way? If they still don't know, I'll point to an S somewhere else, or I'll draw an S and I'll say, now look at your S and look at my S. Do you see a difference? And they'll be like, you know, and then they'll erase their S and they'll correct it. So instead of just being like, you did that wrong, I try to help them to see the problem with what they did, so that they, you know, don't struggle with it going forward, and they kind of develop the skill of editing their own work. So how often do we change spelling words? In the program, the natural progression is that every week we have a new spelling rule. So therefore, every week we have a new set of spelling words. My boys tend to not struggle with spelling too badly, and the rules that are in sequence 1 are things that they've already learned in All About Reading. So they don't struggle with them too much at the beginning of it. They may struggle a little bit later on. So we just follow that sequence of doing it 3 to 5 times a week, and we do one set of words with its related rule per week. If you need to change the sequence of the spelling because your child is not really locking in the words or understanding the spelling rule after just 1 week, then you are completely free to just abandon the sequence, use those spelling cards, and just do the next one. So if you have to stick with one spelling card for 2 or 3 weeks, that's fine. And then as soon as you're done with that, get the next spelling card and, you know, use. Maybe you could even trim the memory statement card in half, because if you'll notice there's a grammar half and a spelling half, trim that in half and go through the grammar at a different pace than you do the spelling if they're getting the grammar but they're not getting the spelling. You can definitely tweak and modify to fit your child's needs without any concern at all. Like, don't be stressed out about that. Okay, so we have flipped to the US map, and I'm having my boys just place a check mark or color in the state as I call it out. And then I verbally ask them to give me the capital name. So you could do that however you want to. You might not care if they know the capitals. You might not care if they know the state abbreviations. You may just want them to be able to find each state on a map. And if that is your goal, then that is perfectly fine. Like, do that. But you do get to decide how that's done yourself. And that's it. We are done. We did our morning basket together on the couch. We did our memory statement board time, and we did our daily pages. And in reality, this was about an hour of time. You see that Colton is very happy to be done, and he's chanting about money in front of the camera. So we're all happy to be done. We do our history on one day of each week, and so that's not included in here, but that's how we do it, and you can follow the grid or make your own schedule when it comes to that. I have no idea what he's saying. But anyway, this was a long video. Congratulations if you stuck it out.